He doesn't look anxious. That's the problem. He wakes up on time. He goes to work. He answers messages. He handles things. No panic attacks. No visible spirals. No dramatic breakdowns in the middle of the night. If you ask the people around him, they'd probably describe him as steady, responsible, maybe a little intense, maybe stressed. But who isn't? And yet, something is running underneath all of it. It shows up when someone changes plans last minute and his jaw tightens. When a simple question, "What's wrong?" feels like an accusation. When he sits down to relax and can't. When silence feels heavier than noise. Here's the uncomfortable part. A lot of male anxiety doesn't look like fear. It looks like control. It looks like irritation. It looks like working late for no clear reason. It looks like being just tired all the time. And because it doesn't match the stereotype, it often goes unnoticed by everyone, including him. Most people think anxiety announces itself. Racing heart, sweaty palms, visible worry. But for many men, anxiety doesn't collapse. It tightens. It doesn't ask for help. It adapts. And adaptation can look impressive. That's the shift. This isn't about fragile men who can't cope. It's about men who cope so well that nobody realizes they're not okay, including themselves. Let's start somewhere ordinary. He's at home. It's evening. He's been working all day. Nothing dramatic happened. Just emails, meetings, deadlines. His partner asks a simple question. "Can you help with this?" His reaction is slightly sharper than it needs to be. Not explosive, just a tone shift, clipped response. A sigh that carries more weight than the situation deserves. Later, he'll justify it. Long day, too many demands, no big deal. But here's what's happening underneath. Anxiety doesn't always feel like fear. Sometimes it feels like being overloaded by small, unpredictable inputs. Every request feels like one more variable he can't control. Irritability becomes the visible symptom. Overwhelm stays hidden. And anger feels safer than fear. Anger has direction. Fear feels exposed. That's the first sign that often goes unnoticed. Persistent irritability that doesn't match the situation. Not occasional frustration. Not a bad day, but a baseline tension. A readiness to react. He may not even recognize it as anxiety. To him, it feels like other people are inefficient. Too emotional. Too demanding. Micro-resolution. When the nervous system is on edge, it scans for threat. Even small disruptions feel bigger than they are. But here's the deeper question. What happens when irritation becomes the only acceptable outlet for stress? Something else begins to happen. He starts staying busy, not because he has to, because stopping feels uncomfortable. Weekends fill up. Projects multiply. The to-do list grows even when it doesn't need to. If there's nothing urgent, he creates something that is. On the surface, this looks admirable, driven, productive, reliable. Inside, it's different. Stillness creates space, and space allows thoughts to surface. What if this doesn't work out? What if I'm behind? What if I'm not doing enough? So he moves. Productivity becomes anesthesia. You'll hear it in the way he talks about rest. I can't just sit around. I'll relax later. I just like being busy. Maybe that's true. Or maybe quiet feels like exposure. Here's the micro-resolution. Achievement temporarily reduces anxiety. It creates measurable proof of competence. It gives structure. It earns validation. But it only works while you're moving. The deeper problem emerges when productivity becomes the only way to regulate your internal state. Because eventually, there's a moment when the workday ends. And the noise comes back. Now notice something subtle. He doesn't describe himself as anxious. He says he's wired, or restless, or bad at relaxing. Language matters. If anxiety doesn't match the cultural script of visible fear, it gets renamed. Renamed stress, renamed ambition, renamed personality. Let's move to another situation. He's with friends. They're talking, joking, normal conversation. He's there, but he's not fully there. He checks his phone more than necessary. He tracks time, He feels slightly disconnected, like he's observing instead of participating. Not because he dislikes them, because his nervous system doesn't fully power down. Social settings contain unpredictability, emotional nuance, unscripted moments. For someone carrying quiet anxiety, that unpredictability can be draining. So he withdraws in small ways. He cancels more often, says he's tired, keeps interactions shorter. Nothing dramatic, just gradual reduction. Micro-resolution. Avoidance lowers immediate discomfort. If a situation subtly activates tension, skipping it feels like relief. But here's the catch. Avoidance teaches the nervous system that the situation was dangerous. And the next time, the activation is slightly stronger. This is how anxiety grows without ever being named. It doesn't explode. It narrows. Social world gets smaller. Emotional range gets tighter. Tolerance for uncertainty decreases. Now add another layer. Control. Watch how he responds to unpredictability. Plans need confirmation. Details matter more than they used to. He replays conversations in his head afterward, checking for mistakes. From the outside, this can look like high standards. Inside, it's vigilance. If everything is accounted for, nothing can go wrong. But life doesn't cooperate with that strategy. A delayed flight, a change in schedule, a child getting sick, a client pulling out unexpectedly. Each disruption hits harder than it objectively should, because it's not just about the event. It's about the loss of control. Here's the small realization that starts connecting all of this. The irritability, the constant busyness, the subtle withdrawal, the need for control. These aren't separate personality traits. They're adaptive responses to an underlying state of chronic tension. And chronic tension doesn't feel dramatic. It feels normal once you've lived with it long enough, which raises a more uncomfortable possibility. What if what you call your personality is actually your nervous system compensating? Don't answer that yet. Just notice something. When was the last time you felt completely at ease without distraction? No phone, no task, no background noise, just still. If that question makes you slightly uneasy, that reaction matters. We're not at the core yet, but the pattern is starting to show. Male anxiety often hides in plain sight, not as visible fear, but as friction. And friction, over time, reshapes everything it touches. We're going deeper next. Now we need to crystallize something that's been forming in the background. Up to this point, everything we've described could still be dismissed as stress. Long hours, responsibility, pressure, normal. But here's the turning point. Stress usually has a clear source. A deadline, conflict, a financial strain. Anxiety, especially the kind we're talking about, doesn't turn off when the source is gone. The meeting ends. The problem gets solved. The house is quiet, and the body is still braced. That's the difference. Male anxiety often hides behind competence because competence keeps it socially acceptable. He performs well. He provides. He handles complexity. No one questions the internal cost of that performance, including him. Here's the central realization that reorganizes everything we've said. For many men, anxiety doesn't feel like fear of the world. It feels like responsibility for holding it together, not collapsing, not slipping, not being the weak point. So the nervous system stays activated, not because something is happening, but because something might. That subtle might becomes constant. And when that state becomes baseline, it no longer feels like anxiety. It feels like identity. I'm just intense. I just care. I have high standards. I don't like chaos. Some of that may be true, but if the intensity never fully drops, if care turns into hypervigilance, if standards become intolerance, then we're no longer talking about personality. We're talking about chronic activation. Let's move from description to cost. Imagine this scenario. He walks into his house after work. His child runs up to him excited, talking fast, full of energy. Instead of warmth, he feels a spike. Noise, movement, unpredictability. He reacts with, "Hey, calm down." Not cruel, not abusive, just sharp. 5 minutes later, he feels a quiet sense of guilt, but he rationalizes it. He's tired. It's been a long day. What he doesn't see is that his nervous system has been in low-grade fight or flight for 10 hours already. There's no buffer left. Anxiety reduces margin, and when margin shrinks, patience goes first. Now expand that over years. The partner who feels like she's walking on eggshells during certain hours of the day. The friend who slowly stops sharing deeper things because the response is always practical, never emotional. The child who learns that big feelings should be toned down around dad. None of this looks catastrophic. It's subtle, but subtle patterns shape relationships more than dramatic moments. Here's the uncomfortable layer beneath it. When anxiety is unrecognized, it becomes atmosphere. Changes tone. It changes responses. It changes what's allowed emotionally in a space. And because it's not explosive, it's rarely addressed directly. Let's look at the body. Chronic tight shoulders, jaw clenching at night, headaches that are blamed on screens, digestive issues with no clear cause. The body keeps records the mind refuses to label. You can call it stress. You can call it aging. But the nervous system doesn't care what you call it. It responds to activation. Here's a small but important insight. Anxiety is not weakness. It's vigilance without rest. And vigilance feels necessary when you believe that if you drop it, something will fall apart. This is where things get more personal. Because at some point, the external demands are no longer the primary driver. The internal standard is, he double-checks emails not because they're unclear, but because uncertainty feels intolerable. He replays conversations not because he made a mistake, but because ambiguity feels unsafe. He anticipates worst-case scenarios not because they're likely, but because being unprepared feels unacceptable. And here's the cost that rarely gets acknowledged. Living this way slowly disconnects you from ease. Not joy in the big sense. Ease, the ability to sit without scanning, to listen without preparing a response, to experience a moment without calculating the next one. When that capacity shrinks, life becomes management. Everything is managed. Time, reactions, outcomes, perception. But management is not the same as presence. And here's where the second half shift needs to happen. If any part of this sounds familiar, the reflex might be to justify it. This is what adulthood is. Someone has to be responsible. I'm fine. Maybe you are functional. But functional and regulated are not the same. The real question isn't whether you're succeeding. It's whether you're at ease inside your own life. Notice your immediate reaction to that. If it feels irrelevant, dismiss it. If it feels slightly uncomfortable, stay with it. Because the most dangerous version of anxiety is the one that works. The one that helps you achieve. The one that earns respect. The one that never forces a crisis dramatic enough to demand attention. It just tightens gradually, until one day you don't remember what relaxed feels like. This isn't about diagnosing yourself through a video. It's about recognizing a pattern that has been normalized. Boys are often taught, directly or indirectly, that fear should be converted into action. Don't sit with it. Fix it. Don't express it. Handle it. Don't dwell on it. Move. That training produces competence. It also produces men who can feel anxiety as urgency, as control, as frustration, but not as vulnerability. So they treat the symptom they see. Anger, work on patience. Overworking, optimize productivity. Withdrawal, blame exhaustion. But the underlying activation remains untouched. Here's another micro-resolution. The moment you name something accurately, it loses some of its invisibility. If irritability is anxiety, if busyness is avoidance, if control is fear of unpredictability, then the narrative shifts, not to self-blame, to clarity. And clarity changes what you can no longer ignore. We're approaching the part that's harder to sit with. Because once you see the pattern, continuing it becomes a choice. And choice introduces responsibility. Up next, we're narrowing this down to you not as a concept, but as a person living inside a nervous system that may have been running harder than you realized. Not to men in general, to you. Because once a pattern becomes visible, it stops being abstract. It becomes personal. Here's where the tension increases. If your nervous system has been running in the background for years, if irritation has been your pressure valve, if busyness has been your sedation, then slowing down will not feel peaceful at first. It will feel wrong. That's the part nobody talks about. You might think, fine, I'll just relax more. But when chronic anxiety has been normalized, stillness feels like exposure. The moment you sit without distraction, the mind starts scanning. Did I forget something? Am I behind? Is something about to go wrong? Even when nothing is. So you reach for the phone. You start a small task. You reorganize something unnecessary. Relief returns briefly. That loop is important because it reveals something uncomfortable. The behavior isn't random. It's regulating. You're not overworking because you love exhaustion. You're not controlling because you enjoy tension. You're managing internal discomfort the only way you learned how. That realization can go one of two ways. It can soften you, or it can threaten your identity. Because if anxiety has been fueling your productivity, your reliability, your reputation as the strong one, then what happens if you loosen it? Who are you without the edge? This is where many men unconsciously choose to stay activated. Not because they enjoy it, because they fear what happens without it. Let's confront something directly. There is a difference between strength and constant bracing. Strength allows flexibility. Bracing reduces movement. If your shoulders are always tight, that's not resilience. It's preparation for impact. Ask yourself something practical. When something unexpected happens, a plan changes, someone disagrees with you, a mistake surfaces, does your body react before your mind does? Does your chest tighten? Does your tone shift? Does impatience arrive faster than you intend? That speed matters. It tells you the nervous system is leading. And if the nervous system is leading unchecked, relationships absorb the overflow. Here's another real scenario. A partner says, "You've been distant." Your immediate response is defense. "I've just been busy. What do you want me to do?" "I'm doing everything I can." Maybe all of that is factually true, but distance isn't measured by tasks completed. It's measured by emotional availability. And anxiety narrows availability. Not because you don't care, because caring feels risky when you're already stretched thin internally. So you default to logic. Solutions instead of presence. Efficiency instead of vulnerability. That strategy works in professional environments. It often fails at home. Over time, this creates a subtle divide. You're physically there. You're financially contributing. You're problem-solving. But the emotional atmosphere feels slightly guarded, slightly tense. And if no one names it, it becomes normal. Here's the long-term consequence few consider. Children don't just learn from what you say. They learn from how your nervous system behaves. If they grow up around constant low-grade tension, they calibrate to it. They may become anxious themselves, or they may become emotionally avoidant. Not because you were cruel, because you were chronically activated. That's the ripple effect of unrecognized anxiety. It doesn't explode, it transmits. Now let's remove everyone else for a moment. Strip away partner, children, coworkers. Just you. When was the last time you felt fully safe inside your own body? Not distracted, not numbed, not achieving, just safe. If you have to think hard about that, notice the weight of it. Because the cost of male anxiety isn't just relational. It's internal exile. You can succeed externally while feeling subtly hunted internally. Always scanning, always preparing, always anticipating. And eventually, the body starts sending stronger signals. Sleep disruption, chronic fatigue, irritability that feels harder to contain, moments of unexpected emptiness. This is often where men finally pause. Not when relationships strain, not when someone expresses concern, but when performance begins to slip. That's the irony. The very thing anxiety was protecting, competence, becomes threatened by the anxiety itself. Now we're at the decision point. You can continue interpreting these patterns as personality. This is just how I am. You can frame them as the cost of adulthood. Or you can consider something more destabilizing. What if your nervous system has been asking for attention for years, and you've been negotiating with it instead? Naming anxiety doesn't weaken you. It removes distortion. But here's the difficult part. Awareness alone won't feel comfortable. If you stop filling every gap with activity, discomfort will surface. If you allow silence in a conversation instead of solving it immediately, vulnerability will surface. If you admit, even privately, "I think I've been anxious," something inside will resist, because that label challenges the image of control. This is where choice becomes real. Not a dramatic choice, a quiet one. The next time irritation rises faster than it should, pause half a second longer than usual. The next time you reach for distraction the moment things get quiet, wait just long enough to feel what you were avoiding, not to fix it, just to notice it. That pause is small, but it interrupts the automatic loop. And loops are what keep anxiety invisible. You don't need to announce anything to anyone. You don't need to transform overnight. But you do need to stop pretending that constant tension is normal. Because the longer you live braced, the more it defines you. And here's the final tension. If nothing changes, this pattern will not remain static. Chronic activation tends to escalate. Patience shortens. Avoidance increases. Health erodes slowly. Relationships cool gradually. Not dramatically, gradually, which makes it easier to ignore. Until one day, the distance feels wider than you expected. So here's where we end. Not with reassurance. Not with a neat solution. But with a question that lingers longer than this video. When you finish listening and the room goes quiet, will you immediately reach for something to fill it? Or will you sit there for a moment and notice what's been running underneath all this time? If something in this video resonated with you, if it challenged you, strengthened you, or gave you clarity, take a second and hit the like button. That small action helps this message reach more men who might need to hear it. And if you're committed to becoming a stronger, healthier, more self-aware man, subscribe to the channel. We release content consistently to support you on that journey. You're not alone in this. I'll see you in the next video.